Hey Photo Forward listeners. It's the winter, slightly post-holiday season. A time to step back, reflect on the year behind us, what a goddamn wild one, and look forward to the future and how your photographic work can and should evolve. And yeah, there's that whole giving of gifts thing. And as my present to you all, the podcast is back, delivering weekly episodes on photography, creativity, and making a living as a visual storyteller. Yes, finally, at long last, after taking a while away from the podcast during 2021, following the unrest in the Twin Cities, and examining how to make the show more inclusive, the Photo Forward podcast is back and will be better than ever. We've got some incredible interviews lined up for the coming months and experimenting with new content on the show, like Q&A segments, episodes that are going to be huge. But more on that after the bulk of today's show. Again, thank you all so much for your patience. So, without any further ado, let's get into this week's episode on my curated list of 5 of the best pieces of reading material for you, the photographer, or the visual storyteller in your life. With a bonus item on the list that should just be flat out required reading material for every fucking human that's sufficiently old enough to read it. Hello and welcome to the Photo Forward podcast, the weekly show where we explore the stories behind some of the greatest photographers and visual storytellers the world over. From their photographic origin stories to finding work-life balance as creative professionals, to how to actually make a living as a photographer, cinematographer, or multimedia creator. We uncover what makes them tick and their shutters click. I'm your host, Ben Brewer. So, as you'll probably figure out as we go through today's list of books for visual creators, there's going to be 3 major themes, if you will, in the content: headspace, history, and principles. Personally, as a photographer, those are some of the most critical aspects of personal and professional development, in my opinion, that you can focus on. Before we can externally create what matters to the world in photos, videos, multimedia, what have you, you've got to start with yourself. Put simply, there are no visual creators that create high-quality work over a sustained period of time that haven't done the work of getting their mind right, tackling limiting beliefs, revealing unconscious assumptions, and breaking probably most insidious of all, valuing your work as your worth. There's a lot more to discuss on mindset and worth that I'll definitely be getting into on future solo episodes of the podcast, and honestly, would love to talk on specific Q&As that people have on the topic as well, but we'd be here all damn day. But what we do have time for is going through what I believe to be one of the most important books any creator can read early and often. The first book on today's list, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. From his metaphorical resistance, in quotes, that so perfectly captures the psychological foe of creating work consistently to a few pull-no-punches wake-up calls scattered throughout the book, The War of Art is in no uncertain terms a creative kick in the ass. Equal parts artist's owner's manual and meditation, Pressfield's tough love novel is all about identifying and tackling the internal and external enemies of creative ambition. As Pressfield says, we can't control the level of talent we've been given. We have no control over the nature of our gift. What we can control is our self-motivation, our self-discipline, our self-validation, and our self-reinforcement. We can control how hard and how smart we work. While the book might only be a scant 160 pages, every line will hit home like a sack of bricks for any creator, whether or not you're ready to hear it. So after starting with the psychological, we're going to take a hard left into the entrepreneurial, with the slice of life and lifestyle design on the side. This is the newest book on the list, but with ideas and principles that have been time-tested for decades in the world of business. Now, stay with me here, because I know you're going to go all collectively bristle at that. No, this isn't some hokey Napoleon Hill Think and Grow Rich or The Secret visualization bullshit. This is real systems and practices to create a work and personal life that hums. And number 2 on today's list, The EOS Life by Gino Wickman. Now, the author's name might be familiar to some of y'all who have dabbled in business classes in the past 20 years or so for his, honestly, pretty unique for its time, business structure handbook, Traction, initially published way back in 2007. And just a fun little aside here, back in the day, I worked at a small video production company recently out of the glow of the plucky startup phase that was dealing with some structural issues, and we eventually implemented the EOS, which is short for the Entrepreneur's Operating System process. And pardon my French, but I fucking hated it. From repetitious meeting formats to delegated rocks for individual quarterly goals, it all felt so rote and thoroughly depriving us employees of any creative spirit. Well, much like the angsty teenager that grows up and realizes that their parents aren't completely full of shit and actually had some good ideas. Yeah, rereading Traction and recontextualizing the EOS system with another decade of work experience under my belt totally blew my mind. In the same way that Extreme Ownership by former Navy SEAL Jocko Willink, which could have easily made the list as well, forces the reader to understand that discipline in principles leads to freedom in actions, with a dash of coming to grips that you're truly the only one responsible for the choices you make, and by that, the state of your life. In that same way, implementing a system and a structure to your business, and hell, your life as a whole, allows you, the artist, you, the entrepreneur, to be infinitely more creative in the work that you produce, placing the time and energy on the most important things and not constantly reinventing the wheel of making work work. All of that is a long-winded way of leading up to the actual book that's being recommended, though reading through Traction for background isn't an awful idea. Phew. Essentially, Wickman's recent book seeks to take the ideas from the entrepreneurial operating system and apply it to your life as a whole, work and all. Half of our life is spent at work, if we're lucky, only half, so we ought to make damn well sure it fits into our concept of an ideal life. Put simply, the EOS life boils it down to this: doing what you love, with the people you love, making a huge difference, being compensated appropriately, with time for other passions. Now, who couldn't get behind creating a life like that? Although, as I'm writing this out, it seems borderline trite to say, understanding the history of photography is critical to becoming an educated, effective, modern-day photographer. I'm a firm believer in that old adage that you can't truly know where you're going until you know where you've been. In a world of technological advancements, cutting-edge cameras, and a barrage of visual information, in my opinion, learning from the masters of our industry, past and present, has never been more important. There are few more brilliant visual creators to learn from in the 20th century than the subject of the third book on today's list, presented in a brand new, definitive biography that unlocks her remarkable story, a nanny who lived a secret life as a world-class photographer, Vivian Meyer developed by Anne Marks. While many photographers have heard the name Vivian Meyer before, understanding the depths of her life and prolific photographic production is such a perfect example of reading beyond the surface level of Instagram and social media image making. The 2021 biography shows the reader both her masterful images with like 400 photos placed for the first time in the context of her life, as well as the capacity for photography as therapy, expressing herself through photography, crafting a private portfolio of images that are just so full of emotion, authenticity, and just humanity. As Washington Post journalist Marian Winnick says in a review of Vivian Meyer Developed, quote, considering that hardly a thing was known about Meyer when Marks began her project, her achievement in documenting Meyer's peregrinations and troubles with such clarity and feeling is remarkable. Marks studied archives to identify the buildings where Meyer had set her photographs, and then used phone books and census records to zero in on the people depicted. Marks believes that although she never sought recognition in her lifetime, Meyer would have thoroughly enjoyed the unexpected way her posthumous story has unfolded. It's a 1 in a million ending, another beginning, really, to an already remarkable life, Marks declares. If she had read the account in a newspaper, Vivian would have loved the particulars. She would have absorbed every juicy detail and stood on the sidelines with her camera, intent on capturing it all. Vivian Meyer developed is a photographic character study worthy of your reading eyes. As many of you might know by now, despite my entire career being based in photography and visual storytelling, my formal education and college degree are in something far, far, far more granular and, spoiler alert, neuroscientific, biological chemistry with a focus in neuroscience to be precise. That all being said, I do recognize that this next book might not be for everyone, as it leans somewhat heavily on scientific research, study, and extensive theories. But I do promise that if you can get through some of the heavier technical explanations, this is a book full of gold in terms of understanding the systems and processes of human thought and action, and how it applies to everyone you engage with as a visual creator. Number 4 on today's list, Thinking Fast and Slow by Nobel Prize-winning economist Daniel Kahneman. Without spoiling too much of the core argument that Kahneman makes in the book, in impressive detail, the neurological, psychological, and behavioral systems that underpin his theory, there are essentially two dichotomous modes of thought that we're able to engage with as we humans go about our lives, System 1 and System 2. While System 1 is fast, instinctive, and emotional, System 2 is the slow, deliberate, and logical system of thought. One of the fascinating outcroppings of the two systems of thought that Kahneman dives into is the need to question our regularly false intuitions and keep a healthy mindfulness of all of our deep-seated biases. While the entire book, all 400 plus pages in all, is full of mental models and analyses of behavior, my personal favorite chapters are towards the end in the sections revolving around the two selves we all live with, an experiencing self and a remembering self. And the latter usually wins out over the former. Think about the last time you took a lengthy vacation that went practically perfectly, but if on the last day things went poorly, you'll tend to remember the vacation as negative. Your memory of the event overrides your experience of it. As Kahneman said, confusing experience with the memory of it is a compelling cognitive illusion. And it is the substitution that makes us believe a past experience can be ruined. The experiencing self does not have a voice. Another section of the book that I'm drawn to, particularly as a photographer, deals with risk and a narrowness of thought surrounding it. For those listeners who are working photographers, cinematographers, etc., think back to a recent assignment of yours. When did you make the most creative, unique, or eye-catching images during the course of the shoot? If you're like most folks, chances are pretty good that those didn't come until after you'd captured the safe shots to CYA, and then moved on to taking those creative risks during the course of the assignment to get the creative or special images. Put simply, outsized outcomes in the photographic world only come from taking some necessary creative risk. Naturally, as humans, most of us are so averse to risk that we actively work to avoid gambles. Kahneman explains that since some gambles are clearly on our side, they can't all be against us. So by avoiding them, we essentially lose money or positive results. One way that we can decrease that natural risk aversion is to think broadly rather than narrowly, looking at our combined set of wins over many small gambles. Thinking narrowly, looking only at short-term losses will trap and paralyze us. But thinking broadly, one of those System 2 tasks that takes work, despite us being wired by the fast System 1 to think irrationally economically and pass by risks that are essentially in our favor. A book so deeply encompassing, I honestly don't know how book reviewers can even begin to get across the breadth of examples contained inside of it. Thinking Fast and Slow, for me, has always been a user's manual for choice, decision-making, and everyday judgment to consistently return to when I need a dose of first principles thinking to fall back on. Number 5 on the list of books to inspire and challenge you as a visual creator this year is one that has had a profound impact on my life and perspective on the world. A book originally intended for children, and yet I've gone back and reread it almost every single year of my life as an adult. Don't mistake the playful handmade drawings and watercolors sprinkled throughout. This book deals with some hard grown-up themes and ideas, but with a certain lightness and alacrity that we could all stand to bring into our own daily struggles. Number 5 on the list, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Basing its reality in the creativity and imagination of children, The Little Prince is a fantastical story of a pilot, the narrator, who, after crashing in the Sahara Desert, meets a young boy and is recounted with his story of the little prince's travels across the stars, tackling themes of loneliness, love, loss, and what it means to grow up. This book is such a beautiful parable of, the struggles of life and human nature. For those that haven't read the book yet, I refuse to go on about any more of the detail inside of it because I think it's honestly that special of a book that I couldn't dream of spoiling it for you. But one of the more beautiful lines in the piece that I have tacked up on my wall, literally, because it is a constant reminder as a photographer that not all the beauty we capture is taken in through photos in our cameras. And here's the quote. "And now here's my secret, a very simple secret. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." Put simply, The Little Prince is hands down one of the most magical books I have ever read, and as far as I'm concerned, should be required reading for all, as we navigate our way into and through the unfamiliar territory of life presented to us as we enter the real world. Okay, I know I said there were only going to be 5 books on the list, but I'll leave this one here as a bonus to all of you that made it this far. One of the biggest challenges I believe we face as professional or nearly professional visual creators is getting in our own way, emotionally, professionally, or relationally. The last book on my curated list for photographers and creators is the stark, no punches pulled antidote to our collective self-bullshit, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. Especially in a field as tumultuous and challenging as ours as creators, we've often been told to keep a perfectly chipper attitude or fake it until you make it. In this delightfully subversive and irreverent 2016 book, Manson argues the opposite. Fuck positivity, he says. Let's be honest, sometimes things are fucked up and we have to live with it. Seeing the world and ourselves as we are, not in the delusional, rose-colored glasses of how we'd ideally like it to be, he argues is the way to finding real empowerment in creating your own life. Not everybody can be extraordinary. There are some winners and losers in society, and some of it is not fair or your fault, he says. Once we can embrace our fears, faults, and uncertainties, once we stop running from and avoiding and start confronting painful truths, we can begin to find the courage and confidence we desperately seek. Again, another piece of reading material I couldn't possibly do justice to with a micro review here on this curated list, but for another kick in the ass, it's hard to do better than The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. That's it for today, and thanks everyone for listening to this episode on the top books for visual storytellers and creators of all stripes. As we've talked a lot about on recent episodes, I want to make this year and this new installment of the podcast a lot more collaborative on Photo Forward, incorporating a lot more Q&A or AMA style elements. In so many of my recent Zoom chats and interviews with photographers, I've been getting some brilliant, spontaneous questions that come up in our conversations, and it just made me realize how strong that curse of knowledge is in our industry. I think in a lot of industries, but especially so in the creative ones. We get really skilled at certain things and come to assume that everyone must know that, and then as a consequence, do a really awful or negligent job of explaining that elsewhere. So where do we go from there? If you've got a question or anything you want to ask on the show that I'll respond to AMA style, I've set up a page at photoforward.media/connect, or send an email or voice message to connect@photoforward.media. I'd love to make this a weekly element in each show after the main interview. So whatever is on your mind creatively, photographically, nagging career questions, you name it, send them over to photoforward.media/connect or connect@photoforward.media. I cannot wait to hear what's on your mind and bring some more value to all of you listening. Enjoying listening to the Photo Forward podcast? Want to hear more thought-provoking, engaging discussions about photography, creativity, or freelance business? Well, this is where you come in. We want to get the word out as wide as possible about Photo Forward and reach as many listeners as possible. And the best way to do that is through reviews and recommendations on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're consuming your podcasts. If you want to support more engaging and intimate conversations with photographers, cinematographers, and storytellers the world over, head on over to the Photo Forward page and drop a review to let me know how y'all are enjoying the show, or even just a rating. It means a ton to growing the show, and I personally read through each and every review as I work to make this show the best damn visual storytelling podcast out there. Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, keep seeing, keep thinking, and keep putting your best photo forward. Catch you all in the next one.